Hello, happy May, we're ready now to play. Flowers bloom, the sun is bright, it's such a lovely day.
Remember the days of the old schoolyard? We used to laugh a lot. Oh, don't you remember the days of the old schoolyard? When we had imaginings and we had all kinds of things and we laughed and needed love, yes I do. Oh, and I remember you.
And now on PG Podcast Network, it's time for the Year-Round Carnival with Vince Accardi and your host, Racetrack Ralphie.
We're back to school for one more week with a few fundamentals to have a look at. Thanks so much for listening to Year-Round Carnival. Each and every week we review the best races in Melbourne and Sydney. But there was a little taste of spring, so we should jump into two good races from Flemington on Saturday. Of course, we've got a couple little hidden nuggets for the members bonus, but we'll get to them. In the meantime, Vince Accardi from Daily Sectionals. Good morning, mate.
Yeah, good morning, Ralphie. But how wicked was the track? It was sensational, wasn't it?
Oh, mate, when Flemington put out on Friday their little report, which is very good, and they said, it's a good four, I nearly drove off the road. I thought, well, we actually got a good four back in Melbourne again.
Unbelievable. I love it.
Yes, absolutely. So how did it play?
Exactly that good.
Yes.
No, it did, Ralphie. Even to the 800, even though the overall figures were below benchmark, the reality is there was slow pace. But if you look from the 600 to the finish line, there was a taste of summer in winter. It was sensational.
Yeah, you got to love it. So the main race of the day, in quotation marks, the Ori Star. Obviously, it's been known as a traditional kickoff race. Small field, and it got smaller when War Machine was scratched at the barriers. Now, Arkansas Kid was disappointing, and Dolan was disappointing. Star Patrol was so disappointing they've retired it. It bled. But in the finish was Boomtown Boss and Royal Insignia. They were both fit, and it's actually not a bad little tie-in with some of the fundamentals we do. Was fitness a big aspect in the race shape result?
Well, if you look at Step A in that first section, 3.2 lengths below benchmark Arkansas Kid, then what we had was we were really on top of the ground with genuine G3, I would say, type ground. And let's take Arkansas Kid, for instance, because you're looking at the taper conditioning. The split time between the 8 and the 6 was plus 2.1. The 6 to the 4 was 2.2 above. 4 to the 200, we started to see the decline. Even though it was still above benchmark, but it was a loss of velocity of 1 length, going down to 1.2 above. Last 200 metres, half a length above benchmark, lost another 3/4 of a length. So if we look at it from the 600 metres to the finish line, the horse was slowly deteriorated. And franking what you stated about was it a conditioning factor? Yes, it was, despite the fact that it didn't go that hard. It's just that firm surface, Ralphie, when you're running at a higher speed, it can have an impact on you.
Yeah, and if you look at conversely, Boomtown Boss and Royal Insignia, they were fit. Royal Insignia clearly is the top of the ground horse. I mean, he ran a big race a fortnight earlier in his first decent track run, and Boomtown Boss been racing through Queensland, often without luck, but they both turned up fit. And under that race shape, when the Bunsen burners come on at the 800, fitness is a premium.
It is a premium, Ralphie. It makes a big difference, particularly when you get the opportunity to breathe through the first 400. In other words, relax, get in the rhythm, allow for the strongest finish. So those fit horses, just like as if it was a very heavy ground, can have significant advantages.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, well, the other big talking point from the meeting, I think, we should touch on race 8, which is Sass Appeal. Now, this is what I wrote about Sass Appeal March 7th, and it's a nice little blend actually into some of the fundamentals we'll talk about today. 2.1 lengths above benchmark, ranked 9th in the day. Wow, 3-year-old filly having her 5th run in first prep, and after 2 walk-dash home races, minus 2.6 and minus 2.1, also here at 1400, has obliterated a PB, announced herself as a genuine Group 1 contender in time, 0.5 lengths above benchmark at the 800, 4.1 the mid-race, +2 last 400. Did lose a length over the last 200 with the race one after a big exertion in the 800 to 400. That's the type of information we put across with Sizzlers. This is the time of year we love doing them in particular as the good horses emerge. So what she'd done on Saturday after posting that fantastic 2.1 lengths above benchmark before going for a spell.
Yeah, well, the return was just off that break of 147 days was a big ominous signal. 0.9 above, third best performance of the day. And yes, probably the part that I love the most, to break benchmark when you're going, 11 lengths below benchmark, that's virtually 2 seconds below the standard, Ralphie, to the 800 metre point, and then to be able to have this excellent move in the mid-race, which was virtually making up that 2 seconds of softness early, and then 12.3 lengths mid-race squeeze, putting that all the Bunsen burners back on, and then that huge last 400 plus 5.5 ended up with 0.9 above. Compare that to its very first start last campaign of 2.4 below, where it ran second. The horse is genuinely, from the way I'm looking at it, Ralphie, has come back about a 3-length better horse. It did peak at Flemington with a 2.1 last campaign. But for me, the way I'm looking at it, doesn't matter whatever angle I take, even if I look at the race matrix, all the signals are minimum improvement of about 3 lengths. So is this a horse that could end up in the +5 range? That's the question I asked myself on Sunday.
Wow. So Danny O'Brien's a great follower of history. He's aiming this horse third up into the Rupert Clark. He's going by a similar path to Stepples that won the 1400 stakes race on Memsey Stakes. Sorry, the 1400 benchmark race on Memsey Stakes Day. So that's going to be her next start. And now, a couple of things. First up, because now I want to blend in the type of information as more as a learning tool. What about the tools you use for first up profile?
Yeah, right. Okay, so when we look at, let's say, the first up scenario, and we are looking at it from which lens? Are we looking at it from a lens of, A, what sort of improvement can we expect, or B, what could this do? Could it be a flattening run? Because we understand the power of the first up run can have a big influence on horses, on how they may perform second up, and depending on when they have their second up run. Is it 7 days, 14, 21, 28? They're the sort of things I put on the table.
Well, let's do both, Vince. Firstly, when you graph a horse's improvement.
Yep. Okay. So the way I look at it is like this when I'm looking at the graphic of improvement. I look at that first run in isolation. That was at Sandown Lakeside. It was 2.4 lengths below benchmark. It was top 10. So a lot of validity around that. The race matrix came in at around 5 lengths below benchmark. I look at the raw figures on the day to give me a feel of what the track condition was like, and the raws were 2.7 below. So all in line with the adjusted figures. And then I look at the critical factors. Number one, what was the early speed? The horse travelled at Sandown 2.9 lengths below benchmark. Finished off the race +1, nice and strong. Then the second step I look at is, okay, here we are, first up, it's 0.9 above. The variation is significant, in my view. It's 3.5 lengths. Now, the -11 is the first thing that I look at when I'm trying to graph out, like, what's the potential for this campaign that I'm going to sort of aim towards. I'm definitely saying the 2.1 is a given, that this is going to be one of these horses in the 20-30% pool that are going to outstrip what they did last preparation, assuming all things are equal and it doesn't run into any, injuries, or they don't have any, wild guesses at different distances. The -11 franks for me that it was way too soft, even though it was a 5.5 above last 400 metres. Had this race been run, say, had the horse been 3 or 4 lengths quicker, which still would have been marked as one of its slowest performances through the first section, I have no doubt the horse probably would have returned somewhere around a +2. knowing that sort of insight for me, Ralphie, I have a lot of confidence that my baseline, which has to be last campaign's prep, plus 2.1, I mark that in. I look at the projection and I take the difference between minus 2.4 and the 0.9, saying, okay, that's 3.3 variation, and saying, okay, we've got a 3.3 variation against the best, puts it up around that. I just use round figures in our discussion, but it's about 5.3 lengths is what I'm anticipating that I can project to. Then I have the final delta, and that is how much more do I understand or don't understand about what else could the horse potentially do if the race was run a bit faster. So I sit back here and say, well, it is possible. If I went really wild, we could be in the plus 6, 7 range. And then I look at the raw figures and compare them first campaign to this run on the weekend. And even that, Ralphie, sort of sums up to me they were similar ground conditions on the day. And that just sort of franks for me with a high confidence level that we're going to be in a band of 2 to 5 above.
So this horse has got to have 4 weeks between its next run, which is ideal. Wow. So to broaden the conversation about first up horses, because you touched on it, the difference between a week between runs, 2, 3, 4 weeks between runs, and what's an ideal setup for horses going forward to avoid flatness?
Well, a couple of things that I like to look at. Number one, when I'm on the racing analytics platform, I'm just looking at the historicals. I look at that last 400 metres in isolation. I see what its peak was. Its peak was a 6.7 above benchmark. That was third up, off a 9.4 lengths below benchmark. But the ranking that day was only around 24. And then I look at this run here, plus 5.5, sorry. That puts it in the top 3. Now, it is a lightly raced horse, Ralphie. It hasn't had too many starts, but it's like right up there in terms of how well the horse can accelerate late. Now, it did it first up versus last campaign. It produced the big performance third up. So it sort of indicates to me, again, a few things. The mare's obviously come back stronger and better. Secondly, they would have had the horse in reasonably good shape to be able to finish off with that big sprint, even though it was aided by a very soft first section, which is the second slowest it's gone in its lightly raced career. It has had a run 11.3 lengths below benchmark and 9.4 lengths below benchmark early, but it's also had a run, Ralphie, where it's gone 2.5 above with the slowdown in the middle.
Yeah, and a phrase I'll often use in our preview podcast, and I absolutely have pinched this from Mark Lambourne, very smart Sydney judge, which is trainer's intent. Now, if you look at this horse, the handicap rating needed to go up to ensure that run, to ensure it gets a run in the Rupert Clark, which is its target race. So that can tell you trainer's intent says, yes, this horse, every incentive to come to play first up. And it is an important thing to blend, because it's one thing for us to look at the figures, and we do so in granular detail, but it's another thing to say, what does the trainer really want here? Now, if it's a horse who already has a high handicap rating, even though we don't use weights, there'd be an assumption that it peaks third up with no real incentive first up. Here, the incentive was there first up, and obviously it delivered.
It did deliver, Ralphie, and the closing data to some extent also indicates the condition of the horse, because had there been a negative over the last 200, off a minus 11, you would say, okay, geez, maybe the horse was also coming in a little bit short in terms of where it needs to be fitness-wise. But that number plays two roles. It plays that one signal about, okay, still strong through the last 3 fractions. The reality is slow tempo, you understand that, but there was no negativity. And everything just points that I just feel, Ralphie, that no matter what, if there was more pressure, I just felt the horse would have rose to the occasion because of where it was fitness-wise and would have eclipsed the 2.1. I just can't help but feel that's the case. And imagine if that would have been the scenario, it would probably start very short next start, like a lot shorter than what it started on the weekend.
Yeah, and it was truckloaded anyway, particularly with that late scratching. Okay, let's broaden some conversations too about just general form study. And here's something that's relatively new to our conversation. I reckon, 2-3 years old, and I want to bring in a horse called Jimmy Star. So he's a Super Group 1 horse, and when he won his third career start at Caulfield on the 3rd of February 2024, if you're playing along at home, he looked like a star in the making. So he won at Bendigo, won at Cranbourne, both on the Bendigo and Cranbourne Cup days. Looked a really nice horse that they had from New Zealand. He wins at Caulfield, and we went, wow, this horse is a star, pardon the pun. Didn't go on with it. Now, afterwards, and, the only judge that's unbeaten is time, is he has become a star. Now, the phrase bounce theory. Can you just talk us through in generalizations and maybe, if you like, specifically with Jimmy Star, because bounce theory is a very real thing.
Yeah, and so which are the dates, sorry, Ralph, that you want?
So Jimmy Star on the 2nd of February 2024 won at Caulfield with a best of the day 1.8 lengths above benchmark. Now that's a relatively short break because Cranbourne was the end of November, summer racing, probably only had a week or two in the paddock, comes out, puts the mouthguard in and goes bang. And I remember we actually, for our preview podcast, wrote The Star Is Born, because that's what we thought about the horse. And then he gets beaten at Flemington and he gets beaten at Newcastle, Eagle Farm, Scone. Then they give him a good break, and then we see what he can really do. But for a while there, it looked like he was overrated.
Yeah, so I guess the first point, and it's a good one, Ralphie, that 70-day break, which we know is very short, and I've definitely learnt over the years that when you see these 50, 60, 70-day breaks, they've had little or no time out, and there's a high probability, depending on who the stable is, and, of course, no injuries, right? Sometimes you could be away for that period because you might have had a little injury and you just missed a week or two of work, so that can happen. But assuming all things were on song, because this horse had won 2 in a row, well, it was pretty much won a lot more than 2, but just from one prep to another, it came out off the 70-day break at Caulfield and went 1.8 above best of the day. First section was 0.6 above. The second section was 2.9 above. The third section was 6.3 above. Really and truly franking all the points about, number one, fitness levels of the horse. And 2, it put down massive last 2 sections. In other words, the last 800 were phenomenal. Then it went to Flemington, the start after. And it ran second, and like all things, you expect the horse to go off that run and win. But here's the challenge. That day, the horse went through the first section, 3.1 lengths above benchmark. And as of today, it still stands as the fastest first section the horse has ever gone in its career, 3.1. Where its average, Ralphie, is roughly 3.7. Now, we know this horse in more recent times has been close to speed, but this is looking at that projection. From there, the horse then had to put in a big slowdown, 4.6 lengths. It did actually rebound, funny enough. Not big, but it rebounded to the tune of about 3/4 of a length. Didn't handle the fast speed as well off a fast first up run. And I would say that's the reason why it got beaten. Now, when we talk about the bounce theory, the horse then had one more run, first of all, at Newcastle, and like you said, went nowhere. Finished 7th that day. It was 3.7 lengths below benchmark. And then again, when I look at the first section, it was 6.7 lengths below benchmark, and its average is 3.7 below, Ralphie. So it was running another 3 lengths slower than what its typical average speed is. It did have a booming last 400. Probably was the signal that things are still good for the horse. And then they gave it a 50-day let-up. Now, when you have these let-ups, and I look at the 70 days, it's a pretty short break, Ralphie. And what does it mean? Well, sometimes when trainers are trying to lengthen their campaigns out of a horse or try and reprogram to target one more race, we do have a scenario where horses, and this is what I've found, A, through some simulation work, B, obviously tracking it real time in races, that when they have these 50-day type breaks, horses generally, regardless of who they are, will do one or two things when they have an extended campaign. Number one, they'll have a negative performance, or they'll test their prior PB, and then they go off the scene. In other words, if they have another run, in almost all cases, they run negative. In this case, it went to Eagle Farm off the 50-day break. Even though it ran third, and you say, well, that's a good run. Yeah, it is a good run for finishing third. You would have got good prize money. On the figures, it's gone down to 5.2 lengths below benchmark. It was inside its average through the first split time, 3.4 lengths below benchmark. Last 200 metres was off, though, 2 lengths below benchmark. Overall score, 5.2 below. Well below what it had done pretty much from Bendigo 23 up until that run. Then they had another crack 21 days later. Now, it ran 7th. This is interesting. But the horse actually improved from that run, even though it was 7th, Ralphie, improved 4.4 lengths. In other words, that was his top-out run off those two runs. In other words, the bounce theory was it went negative. You could expect testing its new PB. Now, its PB leading into that was 1.8 above, and it ended up with 0.8. So it didn't get to the plus 1.8, but got within 2 lengths. What were the negative factors for it? The negative factor was the fact that the horse went 6.3 lengths below benchmark through the first section, and you can blame most of that to the 0.8 below. It was 3 lengths, virtually 3 lengths below its standard average. Its mid-section was solid. It was 2 lengths above. Its last 400 was very, very strong. It was 2.8 above. The ground made up was 6.8. Again, when you look at that, that's like well above its standard band. And you know that the horse is 7th. All came from the fact of where it was positioned through the first section in a race that didn't have the right speed.
Yeah, so, and that's what I'm saying as a more broader rule. And I looked at it actually last week, same stable coincidentally, Signature Scent, returned with a dynamic win at Caulfield. And then last Saturday was really plain. And then I thought, 77 days off South Australia, bang, wins first up, and then that's its best. So if you don't get that good break, sometimes that sort of ignition, and you don't need you don't need specific stats. What you're saying is you've run plenty of simulations and you've started looking for this, that those 60 to 50 to probably 75 day breaks, they're the ones where if they're huge first time, that could be as good as they can do.
That's right. It's just like also you hear and you see and weight of money, how, I don't know whether it's still the same case these days because I really only focus on Saturdays, Ralphie. So I'm not sure too much anymore about during the week. But the power of people wanting to back horses when they're on really quick backups. And I always say, that's good and bad. Like, example, let's say that run that we just looked at with a horse from Flemington, Sass Appeal, if that was on a 7-day backup, that would be a huge risk, and that horse would start at short price favourite.
Yes.
But it would be a huge risk because when horses put in big performances, well, mind you, the horse was only 1 length below its previous peak, and it was first up off a long break. And despite the softness of the first section, that middle and late close, particularly the late close, was very powerful. That takes a lot out of a horse. And a lot of people like to step into these horses when if it happens and they return 7 days later. And usually what I find is most of them fail, unless they're in absolutely weak class. In other words, a lightly raced horse running well below its capability in its subsequent start. Then, yes, in those isolated scenarios, you can reverse it. But in most cases, what they do is they fail because they're flattened. And the 7 days doesn't work, or the 3 or 4 days, all rubbish. Now, if this horse had gone through the first 2 sections on the weekend, 11 lengths below benchmark first up, say 7 lengths below benchmark second up, and then say gets benchmark +1 last 400 metres and still wins the race, or run second, let's say, and that was off a 7-day backup, then I could understand, and it would be a bit of a risk if you want to take it on, because the reality is there's a good probability that that horse will improve further from that run, but it wasn't flattened by it.
So let's expand, and I'll actually get back to the spell situation because I've got a good question from Tom. But just while you've opened the door there with the quick backup, one thing I would say works is when the horses are already fit, they're running through the winter, and fitness is just such a premium. And obviously not off a big first up run, but let's say they're 3, 4, 5 runs into a prep, and then they're on the quick backup on wet tracks. Well, they haven't overexerted early because races, mathematically run slower on softer ground.
No, that's correct. So what happens in that scenario? And see, this is the other. I call this a bit of a myth. Now, I don't know about you, Rolfie. How long have you been studying form? Because I've known you for
with you about
14
years.
Yeah. But before that, you would have done form as well, right?
I was trying my best.
Yeah, right. I mean, you 100%. Like you even worked at the Caulfield stables, right? When you were a young kid.
Exactly.
So you've been around the horses for a long time, watching them and doing all sorts of different things. I would assume doing form. Now, one of the things that I learned when I was younger was that things are pretty regimented about your process, right?
Yes.
That is so far from the truth. That's what I learned. That if you go through a regimented process, number one, the way it conditions your brain unfortunately is not good. It is good if you have a process about okay, these are the core fundamentals that I have to look at as a baseline. You have an open view, but it was more about the core fundamentals in the early days for me is when I'm doing form, it's very regimented. What classes, okay, if it's this class, you give it this bonus. If it's that class, you give it that bonus. Okay, what was the margin from the winner? There's the deduction. Number 2, what was the limit weight, plus or minus? What did the horse carry? Where was it in its form cycle? And you have that process, and you start to form your ratings, right? This is what happens. Typically, the reality is if you start then looking in a fixed view in terms of your optics, you run into big problems because every scenario has a different outcome. Now, you put down just a very clear and concise, what I would call that regimented fundamentals, which is correct, by the way, the fitness and all that, and that's correct. What you said. But here's the variable swing on that. When horses are deeper in their campaign and they're rock hard fit, they lose speed in their legs. That can have an impact on how the performance is going to be on the day, despite how fit they are. Now, are you looking at that? Are you trying to understand what's the tempo really going to be? And it's not just the map saying, this horse is going to lead, this horse is going to be in second position, that horse is going to be... It's what's the tempo? Because that's going to determine whether that horse has got enough freshness in its legs to be able to be positioned in the right spot to win the race. We know it's going to be strong and fit. That ticks the box. But then that variation is now you start to think about the mindset. And this is the mindset that separates between making less mistakes if you're punting. Because the initial reaction is, I'm just going to go and back it. But that to me is like gambling. Now, I'm not saying you're not gambling in any other stuff because there's still elements of luck on the day. This is what this horse racing game is all about. There's a lot of luck involved, that no matter how good we are. But to try and mitigate that or reduce that exposure is you have to understand what impact will that horse have in that race when you know the freshness is out of its legs because it's deep in its campaign. We know it's rock hard fit and it's going to be fine on the wet ground. Now, if it's a slow tempo, no problem. They're going to be able to slot the horse in, even if it's a midfield runner, and you know it's going to finish off the race strong. But if it's race with speed and that horse, instead of being, say, 5-6 lengths off him, is now 10 off him, your money's in the bin. And that means your money's in the bin, or you could have dodged the bullet and saved your money. Because by not betting in that situation, you actually save your money. Now, more importantly to that, not only do you save your money, you save your mind. Because this game, I don't care what anyone thinks, Ralphie, the mind, when it comes to betting, is the most powerful aspect. And all the things that you're dragging in from other form work and studies dictates your reaction subconsciously on what you're going to do. And if you aren't on top of that, you're in a lot of trouble. And you're in a lot of trouble, and a lot of people, that light does never switch on. And this is how you switch it on. You've got to be fluid in your form work. You've got to go through your fundamentals, but then you've got to look at the variations. Don't just take it for granted. That's it. I could say, Ralphie, you're right. And if it was Vince Accardi 20 years ago, 30 years ago, said, yeah, Ralphie, I'm with you. Bang, let's go. Now, we're just talking hypotheticals here, right? But that would be the real case scenario. Now, Vince Accardi 20, 30 years later, not even possible to go down that path, because I'm looking at all the aspects and the variations. And the more you dig into that, the better you become. And this is one of the things that I love about what you've been doing recently, Ralphie, with huge success, I might add. Huge success is the way you've been pulling apart barrier trials.
Yep.
And I know they're just little ones here and there, but I know there's plenty of trials, that you're looking at. It's not like miraculously I just found that easily. No way. You would have had to go through a whole bunch of trials to find it. And if you understand the power of the data, and this is why I come back to the use of benchmarking, is because with that you can get insight about, number one, what the expectation might be first up, whether they're going to leave it behind because the trial was too fast and there was a little bit too much excitement by the rider, or the horse was just feeling that great, the rider couldn't contain it. And then we get a flat run, or you can see a sharp 200 here or there, and the big signal that the horse is already trending to its form capabilities in a trial, and the excitement. And this is the things you've been finding. You've been finding and isolating runners that are trending like close to their numbers and having race simulations, and then coming out and, they're going, and this is very true, which is harder to find these days. Again, years and years ago, I used to hear about, and I would practice this and say, why didn't that work? And sometimes it would, about horses that would, in the past, if you were dropping back from a metro to a provincial, it was actually an advantage. I don't believe it is today, right? But it was absolutely an advantage. But if you don't know all the little nuances, that's where the trap is. You would go and back that horse. It's a big class drop. And then you're trying to lament or work out, when you get defeated, why you lost. It's not understanding these subtle refinements. And this is the same with barrier trials. Not understanding those subtle refinements, what it can or can't do for a horse and how it can impact.
So those fines have been for our members' bonuses. So once again, if you want to become a member via my website, racetrackralphie.com.au, or Vince Accardi's work is via dailysectionals.com.au. And I think I've found another couple of good trialers. We had Epic win on Saturday, just up the bush, but that doesn't matter as long as we find them. I think a couple more that I want to talk to you about. So this is interesting too, because if when you say about I'm just going to back that horse. Now, this reminds me of something which is called, I think Malcolm Gladwell calls it the 10,000 hours theory. It's called Tip of the Nose. Daniel Kahneman's written about in his iconic book, Thinking Fast and Slow, about a fireman walked in with his team into a New York apartment and just said, get out. He didn't know why he thought it, but he said, get out. And then the floor caved in. So the fire they thought was above him was actually below him. And it was just that gut feel that the fireman, the chief, felt his ears sort of hot. So it was just something that said, no, this isn't right. Get out. Where I'm going with that is, it is important to have an initial thought with so much, detailed knowledge. In your case, 40 years of studying the craft. But what we like doing on Friday too is then we dig deeper, and you got to question yourself further. It's all right to have an initial thought, and sometimes you'll still land back on it, but you got to still use the numbers to go through your thinking after your initial thought.
Yeah, so that's so very interesting about, obviously I don't know these people that I'm definitely not as learned as you, Ralph, when it comes to, I know you read a lot. I unfortunately don't read that much. I read very specific things. And I personally like audio. This is just what works for me. I like to put the headset on while I'm working. I can listen to various things that I'm interested in. And But I unfortunately, like, I don't look at these sort of things. But the one thing that does rhyme correctly about what you said and about these people that happens in the moment, this all comes about, that first thing that you said. Now, whether it's 10,000 hours or whatever hours it is, I don't know. Because what I'm finding is the more you spend time on, the better your mind comes at looking at data recognition, data patterns, the way figures, they actually speak to you. I mean, and I'm not talking about like, oh, these figures are really talking to me in real life. No, I'm not that zombie. I'm talking about the figures speak to you. In other words, you can see aspects of the variation that you would not see if you weren't trained and skilled. And what's trained and skilled? It's nothing more than practice. That's all it is. Not that you become a genius. It's because it's repetition over and over and over and over. And yes, I've spent unbelievable hours. So what happens, you start to see all these subtleties. You start to see these variations. Now, to the person who hasn't had the same practice, you talked about the firemen and all that. Imagine how many places they'd gone to. You feel it.
Yes.
You actually feel it. And this is the same in this game. When you've gone to that level is not because you're a genius and it's because you turned up every day and put in some work rate. And I will have people that I've spoken to that, let's say, are on the platform. Yeah, I don't know. I'm struggling. Okay, when did you last look at it? Now, and I tell them, be honest. Be honest. Not because I want you to be honest for me. I want you to be honest for you. Because most people extend the truth, or they want it to fit their narrative in the moment. But it's very easy. We know that you spend 3 hours a week on Rappo, on the racing analytics platform. We know you spend 3 hours a week. So if you're talking to me, and I say you spent 3 hours, well, what do you want to learn? You're spending nothing. It's impossible. It's like, why pay the training fee? Or why pay for that fitness club if you're only turning up for 3 hours a week? 3 hours a week is going to get you nothing. It's something, but you're not going to expand your skills. Example, I don't do this anymore like I used to, but these days I still put a rock solid, say, 12 hours a day. What do you want? If I'm spending 12 hours a day, even if it was 8 hours a day, and that other person's 3, in a year, the gap's so big, it can never be recovered. But that's inside of knowledge. So you have to spend time. If you don't spend time with it, more than 3 hours, and maybe that's all you got, well then don't be so hard on yourself. Be more relaxed. Because people say, yeah, but the numbers aren't working for me. I go, yeah, well, how can they work? The numbers work if you put effort in. Then I'll have people on the flip side, and they're spending 10 hours a day, Ralphie.
Yeah.
They're going to be pretty sharp. Now, mind you, I'm saying all this, and I'm looking at, and I want to make sure I say this before we go into the members section, because I just got this feeling you're going to say that soon, Ralphie, right? From experience, is this. Number one, and I'm talking for myself personally, I am so grateful. Grateful that I could cry when you get the goosebumps, I got that right now. That I arrived, and for whatever unknown reason, I landed in the world in the space of sectional timing. And I thought for myself, that's a revolution of the game, right? Even though, if you think back, sectionals were already on tracks more than 20 years ago, right?
Yep.
But for me, that's what I felt. And to be so fortunate that I could work on all this. And I hope over the period I've provided and assisted lots of different people, whether it's in the racing industry, whether it's private people, whatever. But I'm now sitting at a point in time, and the revolution is this, doing from the first Don Scott ways, which is what I used to do, Ralphie.
Yep.
Now I've been for a long, long time, decades, I've just been focused on doing sectional times, and I only use that as my major weapon. Big revolution, but the new revolution surpasses this like no other. Where we are now, and with the power of the understanding AI, the world's a different game now. And this is the biggest revolution that I've ever seen. And I'm saying now to you, Ralphie, right now, because we're very early days, right? I have spent already not anything less than 1,600 hours fully dedicated on AI. Not less than that. I will say it's a lot more than that, but I want to be humble, right? I want to be humble to myself. This is the greatest revolution the racing will ever see. And I am sitting here, and again, I just got the big goosebumps. I just said, I'm blessed. I'm blessed to be on the planet right now to experience this. This is unbelievable. And if people are not starting to understand how to do this work into the future, going to be left so far behind that even what we've been talking about in recent years is going to be so archaic. It's going to make Don Scott look good because this is how much the curve's changed. Sorry, Ralph, just in closing with that.
Yep. No one to dig deeper.
Yep. Here's the fundamentals. Number one, and this is again, I don't want to say I want to kiss the ground, but I want to say, Ralphie, that I cannot believe, because I didn't go out with this thought in the beginning, having the data that we have, you and I are working with, and then to be able to utilize that with AI, which, mind you, in the future, it's going to be so hamstrung for people on what they're going to use. So if they're not in certain pockets, they're going to be dramatically restricted in what they can get out of AI. I'm just sitting back here saying, I can't believe I own all the data. For us to be able to explore into this new frontier, which is mind-blowing, and it brings a junior up to speed a lot faster about knowing numbers.
So what's the phrase? Explain to me like I'm 10 years old. Why is AI going to be so good for horse racing study?
Okay, now I know we're going to go and talk about this a little bit more in the member section, but what it's going to do is it actually will explain what the numbers are doing, what they mean in a race. Because what I've been doing is this. I have been feeding, I call it the membrane. I have been feeding, fine-tuning that membrane to mimic me. All my subtle thoughts, and they're just building process, because you can't dump them all in one hit.
Yep.
You just give them all these little, and then what happens is it starts to pick up those variations. And now, I've also seen, just from a year ago to now, the evolution has been phenomenal, right? It's far more stable. It's so more intuitive. And what it does is it actually explains it without having to sit alongside me or someone that's got a lot of experience in knowing the numbers, what they mean. It actually fast tracks it all because it'll blurt it out for you. This is what it means when this happens, what you've got to be cautious of. It'll red flag you in advance, even if you don't have that knowledge. That's why I'm saying this is going to be the biggest revolution ever for horse racing. Now, it might be for lots of other industries. I've been candid with you, Ralphie. I do not use, well, other than planning a holiday like I do, right? Other than that, or, some investments maybe, right? If I pull that aside, I'm not using it for anything else. Not even interested. This is me talking for me. But I'm sure other people in other areas are doing things that are crazy.
So I found this podcast about a year ago called People versus Algorithms. It's phenomenal. And there's three main blokes, I think, and they're all very, very successful in their field. And I think it's just a passion project. I don't hear any ads or anything like that. And I've looked at their backgrounds, and they're seriously talented people. One of them was an exec at Airbnb when I was starting up. And he's now in video games. And right. his point with AI is he refuses to use any AI when it comes to artistic areas, so like creating video games, but he uses AI for the back end. Yep. Now, I just wonder about, and this just came to me while you were saying that, about the importance of it still being you, but using AI to do the donkey work. Is the phrase he likes
Bravo,
using.
bravo, bravo. I have to
Okay.
say that in Italian, right? Why? Because you're spot on. That's exactly right. I had people say to me, "Oh, we do the race speed profiles and that. You know what it's like? It's like this. The AI can do it. Don't get me wrong. Beautiful. But what's more important is we want the humans, which is us, right,
Yes.
to be learning how to weaponize that tool so we can be better at it and better at our craft." Yeah. So when you're doing analytics, sensational. And back in and doing all the donkey work, absolutely. It rips through it. And then what you do is like, I'll run it automatically now. Just go bang. It's what happens. Once you feed that membrane and then you give it little tweaks. Nah, don't like that. Don't like this. And this is how you're programming it, let's call it, right?
Yep.
What happens is it cuts through it all and says, right, here's the finite horses based on the criteria you've put in play. And then you can deep dive into that. Agree, disagree. But your workflow and your work time is dramatically cut. Example, I will ask it in a space of, say, and I'm being realistic, 10 minutes, right?
Yep.
I might have a half a dozen different mapping probabilities. How are you going to do that by yourself? No, seriously. How are you going to do it
Takes
properly?
days. Would take days.
Yeah,
Yep.
it'll take days. That's right.
Yep. So this is actually what you're saying is, and this is a very old saying, but it applies to the new. The phrase art and craft. So you're still putting the art there, but the craft is the back end doggy work of saving so many, literally hundreds of hours.
Yeah, well, like, for example, for me, like, let's say in Anthropics, I will say, because when you put your history in, so it understands who you are and what your knowledge is, and I make it very clear. I've got over 30 years of experience. Don't bullshit me around. I'm the source, first and foremost, and you will be, working with me, not telling me what to do.
Yes.
Right? Right? So that way there, because it can come up with so many crazy methods, and I go, hey, slow down. Not interested in all these things. Let's get focused. And that's what happens. You train it. Now, like example, Fable 5's out. Forget about it, Ralphie. We'll talk about it in the members. I've given you some docos. It's just like, seriously, freaky good. And for us, I just see mountains of gold, Ralphie. That's all I see.
Well, we're going to send some docos to our members and talk a bit more in our members bonuses, as well as a horse to follow from Flemington that a few people might have missed that I think is going to be real mouthguard in stuff. A couple from Randwick and, like I said, some trials. So we'll leave it there. As always, we got to about 10% of the stuff I wanted to talk about.
Sorry, Ralphie. Sorry.
No, I love it. That's part of the beauty of what we do, and we're going to keep tracking these good horses as they return for the Spring Carnival. If you've listened to all this, thanks for tuning in to Year-Round Carnival.